Hello and welcome to another unscripted SEO podcast. I got a little bit of shtick last time for calling it a video cast in the private comments. I'm not going to be doing that again. This week, joining me back is Cindy and Gerry, and because Jono had more important things to do, we have upgraded. So please welcome Garrett to the sessions. Hi, Garrett.
Hi, y'all. I apologize in advance. I ain't no Jono, but I'll do my best.
But you will still say sack the devs at the end of most recommendations.
Represent.
So this week we've got a few topics that we want to kind of tube a bit over, and one we're excited to kind of kick off with is I'm going to say semi-sneak preview into Garrett's MozCon talk. So Garrett, the floor is yours.
Yo, okay. So actually it's live. For whatever reason, they decided to blow mine up. Like, you can buy this whole MozCon video bundle. Is back in June, but they're like, sneak preview. Look at Garrett's talk. So it's actually available, but I was talking all about cognitive bias in SEO. It's kind of been this theme for me that I see popping up everywhere. Like, as SEOs, we're always thinking just, simple on-page content, technical SEO, link building. And when it comes to keyword strategy, you see a lot of discussion around focusing on search volume. But when it comes to the way that people search, we don't always take into consideration the people behind the search or do it enough. And so my whole MozCon talk was thinking about, the way we search, the results that Google presents, and the results that we choose are all very much informed by our own individual context and different cognitive biases that play into the way we try to find information. So my big thing was all around confirmation bias. Big example, there's a study done in 2015 by Kahan talking all about how we search. The search terms we use are always typically biased. For instance, an example is like, if I want to prove to my mom that coffee is healthy for me because I drink a ton of coffee, if I search that, I'll get a certain search terms and then or results. And then if she searches for why coffee is unhealthy, there'll be some overlap, but you'll see a lot of different results. Like, there's this Harvard study, and you'll see the featured snippet will actually show both versions. It'll pull from the same article, but it'll be like, conflicting results. And so ultimately, as SEOs, we need to think about how our audience is actually, changing up the way that they search and the results based on these biases that they bring to the table in the first place. So it's just a fun marketing psychology conversation tied to SEO that I think is worth exploring.
No, absolutely. I think I'm not going to talk on this specifically, but one of the things which I found cropping up, especially kind of in the last 2 years, has been almost a tendency with SEOs to move towards a survivorship bias as well, in that the top 10 to 5% of things have worked and there's nothing else to learn beneath that. And there's I think it's become a meme now, but there's an analogy that goes on, and it's from the Second World War, when British air bases would record the returning planes that came back and where the bullets were impacting them. Oh, they've returned with this. Let's reinforce those areas. And it was like no, let's reinforce the areas that don't appear to have any bullet holes recorded on them because they've not returned. And it's that same thing. And like you said, it's we have a default, and I think I've called it the checklistness and the checklistisms that have come into SEO have removed a degree of critical thinking. And it's a kind of it works once, it works twice, it will work thrice kind of mentality creeping in.
That Spitfire analogy, I've been using that in so many data talks. I actually have to stop using that now, because if anybody ever sees a talk again, they'll be like, yeah, we've seen this talk before. But it's such a great one. It kind of talks about the fact that, the data that we use, the data we see, we don't look at the data we can't see. And, the amount of times when I'm kind of looking at Google Analytics and I think, well, actually, there's more data in Google Search Console about the same topic. But Garrett, what were you talking about, the kind of like the perception bias and similar bits? There's a fantastic book, actually, talking about how minds change. I'm trying to remember the author, but I think I recommended it at one point to Cindy. I don't know if you ever read it, but it's such a good book. And it talks about the exact same thing. But do you remember the dress that broke the internet, the gold blue dress? This is apparently the same thing. Apparently, you look at it and see it, and it's based on how you sort of previously seen the same things. They kind of did analysis, and they found out that, you know, Crocs, for instance, in different light look grey, look green, and look other colours, and it's really, really, really interesting. I think that my best kind of take from that when I sort of went through it was the fact that if you're working an agency where your solution is to throw more links at a problem, always the solution is there's not enough links. I mean, we haven't got Jono along with us this time, of course, but Jono's always approaches it needs to be on WordPress, and you need to have more technical solutions, and it needs some kind of technical problem kind of being resolved. But it is always kind of interesting how everybody has a set of solutions for a problem, and often it is exactly that, is what you've kind of been told by your peers, been told by the people that you respect, the people that you work with. And if, you know, you sell content, it's always content.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I think a lot of it comes to, and playing into the content strategy, we always think so top of funnel of like giving the informational, you know, whole, you know, Wikipedia article for every keyword that we're going after. Whereas the future of SEO really depends on opinions. You know, why waste time trying to change the opinion of a certain type of audience and not focus and lean into the audience that already is searching for your information? So kind of embedding your opinions, we talk about information gain a lot, and your expertise that already supports the keyword that people are searching for when they're using that bias in the first place. I know what you're talking about, Gerry. There's so many good psychological books out there. One that really influenced me was Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It also messed with me because it made me realize that nobody knows what they're talking about. We are informed, you know, we make our decisions based on like 0.0001% of the data, and there's a whole world out there that we have no freaking clue what's going on. And yet, you know, we have to stand by these strong opinions in terms of our content strategy, and we get it wrong most of the time. Like, no one knows what they're talking about.
No, but it's the degree of confidence in which you can kind of go across in some things. I think, yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If one single or one agency knew everything and knew the secrets, they'd be serving from every client call from a beach in the Bahamas, and they'd never see rain ever again, unless they like rain, obviously. But going back to that kind of point with the biases around things, I think we probably, in my opinion, we're probably at a point now in the industry where, because we're not kind of getting that fresh critical thinking levels coming in, we're potentially now starting to enter that cycle of new SEOs entering the field. I just kind of been learning the biases of what has now come over the last 2-3 years, and we're kind of going to that. Was there a, not saying that we're going to reach this in the industry, but there was a movie in the mid 2000s. I think, was it Idiocracy? Is what I'm thinking of, where he went into a some sort of cryo state for years and came out as the world's smartest man, and like the Twinkie bar was a president or something like that. But I think we're at risk of that unless we break that kind of cycle, and that plays into a lot of. In SEO, we all know we've got the different tiers. The barrier to entry of being in SEO is very low. It's an internet connection and a laptop, and there's the low end, which is the checklists and the rack 'em, stack 'em, and all that. And we end up in a risk where the industry starts playing in favor of that, and then that outwardly does a bad education towards a wider client base, and he just like the lifespan of engagements, the lifespan of clients, the lifespan of success shortens greatly at that point.
We don't have time to fact check. I mean, to your point, I think Rand Fishkin's called this out a bunch, where you look at all these marketing statistics that are done from 10, 20 years ago that aren't applicable anymore. You know, everything is changing constantly. We have these heuristics, these shortcuts, but we get it wrong a lot of the time. And Cindy was mentioning this, you know, before we started, but the whole idea of how this plays into AI overviews and the way that we search, it's going to take some time. But when we use more and more natural language in our searches and not just use, you know, a 2-word head term keyword for what we're looking for, that's going to change the granularity of the results that we ultimately see. And to your point about, we pick out these anecdotal evidence to prove our points. You're seeing it right now with the helpful content update. It's like everyone was freaking out about, 3 or 4 independent sites that saw their traffic get crushed. And now we have the core update coming out, and you're seeing some of them start to get their results back. But we got to remember that these are a few sites out of like billions of results and billions of content out there, and it isn't representative of what's going on. Yet we want to show this causal, oh, well, we saw this one example, so that means this.
So
I think all latents. Oh, go on, Cindy.
So my question, Garrett, is if we're in, so it's an interesting concept that you are proposing, that SEO is now all about opinions. And I like it, but then I find it terrifying, right? Because what you're saying feeds into this narrative of we're in this post-truth world, and truth doesn't matter, facts don't matter, AI can make things up, and that's kind of all right. And I think that there's interesting tension between your interpretation or your take on confirmation bias and confirmation bias that can happen programmatically by AI. And I want to see, like, how do you tease that out?
So I think it is really problematic, because the reality that people, on wherever you come from, wherever your perspective is, Google's editorial, right? Like there's a certain element of, yes, the machine learning is based on relevancy of keywords, on authority of links, of user experience and click behavior. But when it comes down to it, like Google was playing around last year with this idea of perspectives in the tab, or hidden gems now. Like, how are they deciding what perspective should be ranked at the top? Like, how is that a fair decision? Whatever they choose, when it comes to something that's like not necessarily strictly factual, has any shades of nuance or gray, is an editorial decision based on the algorithms that are built, and people are building those algorithms. People are adjusting the nozzles and deciding like the weights of like what should rank at the top. So I don't have an answer, like I can't tell you what's right. All I can tell you is that it is editorial, and we don't have a lot of control of who, there's only 3 indexes from companies in the world, Google, Microsoft, and Apple. And this came out from the DOJ, like in terms of who's actually built indexes. And that's an editorial decision too. Like what is actually curated is based on those indexes. So I'd be very curious, Gerry, Cindy, Dan, what you guys think, because I don't have an answer.
I mean, the good news is that one of the primary sources of information for search engines and ChatGPT and everything else at the moment appears to be Reddit, which is, of course, the best source of factual, reliable, high-quality information.
My counter to that, and so this goes back to an argument I've had for quite a while, and that's when Google started to do the jump links and snippet indexing and that. I see Reddit as being an exacerbation of that problem, and that is that, and I think this is just, again, biases or lack of understanding of things. Fraggles, yes, Fraggle Rock, Christ. I remember Fraggles now. Anyway, that's just derailed the train. Come on, mind. Back on.
Fraggles was the term that I coined for it before Google started calling it passages, because it's a fragment with a handle, a fragment of text with a handle.
Yeah. I think another agency in the UK also then launched a blog post talking about Fraggle indexing.
Yeah, of course they did.
Yeah, I can remember. I won't name them on here.
I was going to say, Cindy, you were talking about that. Was it 2017? It was. I'm thinking it was 2017.
2017 or 2016, yeah.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about it on Gagged.
So I think Fraggles are Google's response to. I mean, the example I always use, and I talk about things like time to result. So a few years ago, I wanted to watch Arsenal be mauled in the European Champions League, so soccer. I typed in what channel is Arsenal v mauled on. The first ranking page was The Guardian in position 1. The title tag, the headline of the article was exactly the same as that question, 100% match. The actual answer to my query was 350 words, 7 adverts, and about 2,000 pixels of scroll actually into the article. Fraggles was for me the response to you're doing this badly, so we're going to try and help users find this content quicker. And then by them looking at Reddit, it's like, I look at Reddit as being, for as horror show as it can be at times, you probably will struggle to find a more honest, unbiased, truthful source of raw information on the internet that isn't curated by a company or doesn't have a hidden meaning. And it's just sweeping into that a little bit too much, in my opinion. Cindy kind of gave me a bit of an eye roll look there.
I mean, unbiased, saying that Reddit is unbiased is like, it's unfiltered, but it's certainly heavy on the, you know, angry incel population.
I more meant unbiased in the sense that if you have a thread discussing, I don't know, say there's a thread out there, 5 best CDNs, for example, there's going to be a lot of bias in those comments, but on the whole of it, no company has created that piece of content. That single document is just the most free-for-all thing, and it has that slight edge, that element to it, I guess.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, though, and say, like, I think that what you're saying about Fraggles, that they solved a problem for users, but the problem was a problem that Google created. And they solved a problem for Google as well. So Google had created this problem by, like, favoring long content. And so people wrote all of these, you know, long, deep posts, but then, you know, that was in a response to Google favoring specific content. And that, you know, so they went from favoring specific thin content to favoring really long content, and SEOs kind of overcorrected to drive rankings. And this was kind of the middle ground, because what had happened was we went from putting one topic on a page to putting many topics on a page, and Google needed to be able to break up the relevance and say this page or this section of the page is about one topic and this section of the page is about a different topic. And sometimes this is relevant even if the rest of the page is not. And so it's more about being able to break up a page for meaningful AI processing and weighting, and indexing properly, or like giving the proper attributes of what the page is about. Because what was happening was the long page was drowning out sometimes really good content because there was so much other stuff, and it wasn't the predominant thing on the page because we didn't know what Google wanted. So I think it's a good example of a different kind of framework called overfitting, where we can have algorithmic overfitting, but this was like SEOs overfitting. SEOs were overfitting to Google's algorithm because it seemed to want this and then it wanted that, and Google had to kind of fight back against this overfitting of people trying to game the algorithm.
No, I'm sorry, Garrett.
Oh, no, I just to jump in on the Reddit thing, I think there is this balance. It's this, like, you know, there's a lot of value that Reddit brings, but there is also the issue of the over-indexing that we saw where everyone's complaining, where it was skyrocketing 500%, you know, from to billions of results. I think there's value in the cultural, you know, relevance and you know, kind of real-time updating of slang and human language, and, you know, kind of Google using that data to train its AIs, but that's problematic as well because, you know, we've already seen the SEOing of Reddit. It really puts a lot of responsibility on individual subreddit communities and the moderation there. And there's a lot of pressure. I think it was Len Alsop wrote a great post about the subreddit communities and how, as they're overwhelmed with content, that makes their job significantly harder. And so the value and the cleanliness, if you can all ever call Reddit clean in the first place, of Reddit content in the first place becomes poisoned, which leads to another issue that I know Cindy's talked about, and she's had ideas about, like the EEAT soup and how AI, you know, which is the future of SEO. We're seeing AI overviews continue to be exposed in the SERPs, that this content that Google is pulling from is getting more and more poisoned from spam, other AI content, you know, SEOs and whatnot, which I think in the long run is problematic. I just don't, again, have a great solution for how you combat it. That's Google's job, right?
I think one thing Cindy mentioned to me as well, I mean, so to kind of clarify, I don't think Reddit is a good fit, but I do agree it's probably overcorrection in some areas. But SEOs have been overfitting since even when I first started really looking into the industry, because when Panda came out and everything had to become a 500-word post, and you had the standard when people built links back then, it was 2 internal links, one to a client, one to Wikipedia, and linking out to the authority sources. It became that I feel like we have that notion of we overfit, but then we try to commoditize the overfitting, and that's where we're seeing the issue.
That's what SEO is.
Yeah.
Overfitting to an algorithm to game it. That's what we do. Welcome to it.
And the big thing with the DOJ conversation is just like, the reality is there's nothing better. There's no alternative that's better than Google right now. Right? Like the hopeful remedies and outcomes of whatever they choose to do inspires competition, innovation, all that. But like, everyone else is so far behind. Like, if you use Bing, if you played around with Search GPT, which I've tested a little, even Perplexity has its moments, but I don't think it's anything's as nearly as good as Google. And that is an outcome of the default, status quo bias, where, everyone's using Google, it gets more data, there are more users, that improves the product. Like, it's this virtuous cycle for them. And I don't have remedy for that. I feel like this has been my theme of this episode, is I don't have solutions. I can point out problems.
Garrett, on that topic, Garrett, at the moment you kind of go Google's the best, which I'm not going to necessarily argue with. But do you think that two things, one, Google kind of are almost focusing on pushing paid rather than, they're more about the money than they've ever been in the past. The reason Google became the best was because they focused not on the money, but on the product. It was almost like how Facebook became the best. It took Facebook years to monetize it. And the same Google kind of couldn't monetize it properly for years, but then they grew, and now they're very much kind of, we've got rid of the don't be evil to being, how do we kind of improve the bottom line for our shareholders? Now, there's companies, as you mentioned, Search GPT, coming into the market. If people start using it and they pay for it, they subscribe to it, like they have a Netflix subscription, I kind of personally think that this could actually be a big quite quickly. I'm curious as to your kind of opinion on that one.
The biggest depends is the outcome of the search defaults, because I think there's something very true in that people are unlikely to choose a search engine themselves unless it's forced upon them. Especially the average person. SEOs will play with stuff. We'll try out DuckDuckGo and realize that's crap and whatever. But I think the biggest outcome is either the government, the US government, in breaking up Google, breaking up Chrome, breaking up ads. I don't know how they'll do it. I don't know the second order consequences of all that. But I think the big shift will change things in the market. The other thing that I think potentially could be interesting is Apple's introduction of Apple Intelligence. I think there's a lot of potential daily life value of being able to integrate your own personal data into your search behavior, that if people find value, and then that leverages ChatGPT, which would not necessarily depend on Google, could be an impact. But we haven't seen the market share change. Like, when you look at these, the Google market share, it's still 97%, even with, or 93%, even with Bing rolling out Copilot, and ChatGPT being around. Until that changes, it's more of the same.
I think we all kind of give Copilot a quick try, and then we forget about it. I mean, I've been trying Gemini on my phone instead of the Google Assistant, but I say to it, please play a song on Spotify, and it like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah, I can't turn off your lights. I can't do all the rest of it. So they've kind of on my phone replaced the assistant with a lesser thing, and it's like, oh, but what can you do? Not
Gerry,
very much.
we all know nothing can effectively turn off the lights at your house. We've heard this so many.
I've shown Cindy recordings of where I'll ask it to turn off my lights, and it will just frown at me and kind of go, no, I don't really know how to do that. It feels like My relationship with my Google Assistant is basically HAL 2000. At some point, it'll microwave me.
Yeah, I'm gonna start. I think you should start calling it Holly and just go the full 9 yards with it. In that sense, yeah. Thank you, Garrett. You got the reference there. I mean, coming back to kind of what we're talking about, like with how the LLMs being potentially poisoned, how we're looking at things, and especially with like the DOJ and different elements there. I cover a lot of international stuff. In 2021, Yandex successfully filed a suit against Google in Russia for anti-monopolistic practices. And the remedy from that was Google were given like 60 days to create a widget to be public or pushed out onto Android phones by the 60-day marker. And it was effectively like a logo, name of search engine, benefits of search engine, very vetted, heavily vetted text to search engine. And at the time, I think Android's market share was something like 85% over in Russia. And all that's done in 2.5 years is take it from being about a 50-50 Google Yandex split to a 65-35 Yandex split. But that being said, again, it comes down to quality of product. If I had to do Yandex versus Bing, Yandex versus DuckDuckGo, Yandex versus Ecosia, even something like that, Yandex is head and shoulders even above them in certain areas and the interface bits. So it had actually product appeal to go there. So kind of my question back to the group is, if the DOJ does do this, and we see that initial, Bing's different, people move to it, and then 2 months later, the market share has gone back and Google are sat there holding up the statement they released, which I know we discussed on the last episode of like, trust us, and they're sat there smiling. What implications does that then have? Because Google's then got the ultimate defense to it's not monopoly, it's because we've got a good product, stifle innovation or shut up effectively.
Well, the answer to that is they'll say, like, Google has a good product because they've been pushing back illegally against the competition for years. They've been able to develop the good product because of this illegal behavior. But I have another thought too on how this all interacts with the this idea of truth. But Garrett, go ahead. I know you had an answer to that question too.
Oh no, just so looking at the decision, so the guy who they brought in, who was a Caltech professor on behavioral economics, his name is Professor Antonio Rangel, talked about this idea of, this idea of status quo bias is dependent on the product quality. And that was the big argument that Google pushed back on, Dan, was that, well, their product is so good. And it's funny, firsthand, I know my experience in my car for Apple has Apple Maps as the default. Yet I hate Apple Maps. I know it's gotten better, but I choose Google Maps every single time. I overcome the friction and I use Google Maps despite Apple Maps being what's there on the dashboard, and speaks to this idea of the product, to your point about if the product's better, people are going to choose that, which is why to some extent at this point, just changing the default, like in the Yandex case, isn't enough. They have such a product advantage, to Cindy's point about years and years of user data with user behavior. And then also the other side of it is being the data of the queries. The argument they made was Google was able to see 50% more long tail and different types of user queries than Microsoft could, which gives them so much more insight in terms of what people are searching and how to improve the product there as well. So there's so many competitive advantages that have been over the past decade plus that just the search default is not enough. Why you need a much bigger remedy to be able to organize it. Cindy.
Well, I totally agree. It's absolutely not enough to do this. And I think the winner is going to be more about this truth and accuracy and stuff like that. But the winner is also going to be, in terms of AI search engines, the company that nails the business model, because the business model changes because AI overviews and generative AI takes so much compute power that, and this is something that no one's talking about, and I don't know why, because it blows my mind. Like, generative AI is not needed for most queries. Most queries are factual queries that don't need creativity at all, that are just answers to, like, what's the name of the drummer in the Cranberries or whatever. That's my example I always go to because there's no drummer. But you don't want, looking up a fact is a quick, cheap thing, and that's what most queries are. when people get trained into these more creative things, that's when you need a generative AI or an opinion or stuff like that. But that's kind of the before and after. What you're saying, Garrett, I think is like, now if SEO is all about opinions, that makes sense to me, because the AI systems really don't seem like they're caching facts right now. And so someone's got to go in and say, this is a fact, or this is the amount of fact that we're going to show on this, and this is the amount of opinion. And that's where the nuance is, because if they don't do that, every query is going to be too expensive and will burn up the planet, and they'll have to charge for the search engine, or they'll have to take more data and get more aggressive on other things. So it's going to be a balance of caching and understanding what is a fact and giving that answer when it's appropriate, and being generative and creative when that's appropriate, and balancing that with what Gerry was saying about, you know, what they know about you, but not overdoing that. Because, like, let's say, you know, for years I was gluten-free, and then all of a sudden I switched to keto. Like, if it's got years of gluten-free and I'm like, no, Apple, like, no more, like, no gluten-free this, I want keto. It's got to know how long to lean hard on training data and when to change it. And that's the nuance, you know. And of course, that also leads to weird filter bubbles. Like, the gluten-free filter bubble is pretty innocuous, but like other filter bubbles could be horrible about like what it's showing me about what is a fact, right? Like, oh yeah, you know, I don't want to get into politics, steering away from politics, but like, this is a fact because I believe it's a fact. That's not a fact, right? And so this is an interesting tension between SEO and politics and AI, right?
Which goes back to the editorial thing, like even something as, and you see it with Google, like, I don't think this is political, but like something like the earth is flat versus round, which I think most people would agree with. You know, there are a large portion of people who say the earth is flat. Scientifically, you know, it's not. And so you'll see Google say they'll all of their results will say the earth is not flat. And so, you know, that there's always going to be these editorial things that we feel should be black and white, that some people argue that they are, and in this post-truth world, intentionally or unintentionally. And I do think it's a near impossible problem for Google or any. The benefit of having competition and having different indexes is you do have diverse perspectives on what the editorial should be. But that doesn't solve any, there's not going to be a universal, like, we all agree on this. We can't even do measurement systems. I mean, we're in the US and we still have, you know, feet and inches and stuff. That's on us, but
but our job is almost to influence that. I mean, my favorite example, which unfortunately nobody searches for, is if you search for the UK sexiest SEO, I ranked #1 for quite a long time. And that was purely because, no, I don't anymore, Dan. I can see Dan's Googling me now. But that was all because a guy called Mark Rofe actually ranked #1 for it. And let's be honest, he's not the UK sexiest gentleman. And yeah, it's true. He actually bought a billboard to kind of advertise himself. But anyway, the point being that it's based on the information out there. And part of our job is to kind of manipulate the information out there. That sounds bad when I say it kind of like that. But we don't do it for bad reasons. We do it to promote the products that we sell or the services that we do. But then, of course, we get into the situation where politicians abuse this and manipulate things, particularly at scale. And when you've got people like Musk who can kind of do this in a crazy large scale way, it suddenly becomes a terrifying kind of world. So, you know, my job as an SEO is to kind of politely influence the search results to promote products and myself. However, when we kind of look at it in the sort of darker ways where, you know, it kind of impacts the global outcomes, it does get quite scary what we do.
Are we not, though? I know it's our job to, this is devil's advocate, not personal, but I know our job is to kind of have that influence, and we have an ethical obligation to do good. But I'd probably say 95% plus of all the work the SEO community does is effectively hired gunmanship, and it's with specific aim and specific focus, and trying to then create that influence, better things, that percentage doing that is going to be outweighed to a point. There's a number of examples in AI, like I know Gerry, you just put a couple in the chat, like how many legs does a horse have, and it gets confused. To be fair though, if you're asking how many legs Odin's horse had, it'd be closer to the actual measurement there. For anyone who understands Norse mythology, my favorite one at the moment, which unless you dig into it, is fun. If you actually, and this is something you touched on, Garrett, about is the Earth round or flat? If you ask Bing Copilot, is the Earth flat? It will give you a very empirical no, give you reasons why, but then he pulls through an image of a square flat Earth. And it's unless you then click on the image and dig into why, because that's like, oh, here's the counter argument, a drawing. And it's just that, what level of understanding does the mass market necessarily have of what they're understanding to be true or not? Because we naturally, the minute Google say or do anything, our kind of almost default is to try and disprove it, prove it wrong, because once burnt, twice shy kind of mentality kind of kicks in. But for my family, my partners, my dad, they're going to take AI overviews as verbatim. I was in the doctor's surgery a couple of weeks ago, and they were Googling something, and they're locked down to Microsoft in the UK, and because they're using Edge. And they read a bit, they read a Bing generative, whatever they've decided to call them, and he didn't click on anything. And I'm sat there like, oh, that's great. I hope you know enough to know if that's true, and you've not just used an AI overview to give me a medication. So, like, given that also the DOJ things are going to affect potentially choice for search engines, is the product being good enough, or could we see market share move just because some tools do things in a different way? And my other argument of this has always been the likes of DuckDuckGo. If there is a remedy of sense of you have to pick, you'll be forced to pick a new default search engine. If you want to pick Google, that's fine. If there's a significant enough media campaign and press campaign from someone like DuckDuckGo of Google bad, E Corp evil, and protect your data, which I think most of the mass market doesn't really understand what data is. I mean, Gerry always uses the example of his 1 billion partners who he shares cookies with on his smart TV. He doesn't understand why or how. Is that enough, regardless of a product not being 100%, as long as it fulfills a need, if there's a secondary motivator kind of affecting it, I guess?
So many thoughts. So it's so tough because, like, we are, especially, well, because you guys, being in the EU as well is a very different conversation in terms of privacy and data. I mean, whether
They're
or
not
not
in the EU anymore.
or sorry,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
No,
It's kind
no
of a
one.
sore
Being in the
issue.
UK,
No one cares about GDPR anyway. Literally, honestly, GDPR is the most. Is like you've got all these legislations and it's painted like a lion made of stone with a big roaring teeth, and instead you get a gummy cat come out. There's literally no teeth to it.
I remember with Italy, initially they were, saying banning chat GPT because of privacy issues, and every individual principality, government, whatever, apologies. That said, I feel like ultimately there's going to be this decision that people have to make if they want to participate. How much privacy and data do you want to contribute? Because I think the better versions of search going forward are going to need to be more personalized, and that's the direction, is the personalization of search, going back to that Apple intelligence and taking any of your past searches, any of your information, any of the context of your life. I know, Cindy, you've talked about a lot about Google with Journeys, and they're doing more stuff recently of like, how is this related to your past searches, and taking all this together. It's going to be an individual decision in terms of privacy and data. To your point about choosing DuckDuckGo,
I'm going to disagree. I don't think people are qualified to make this decision. And the government is going to have to step in and regulate where and how this data is processed and stored. And that's part of the business solution, is offloading some of the sensitive data and the processing to local devices, right? And so it's more like a PWA setup, if you're familiar with that, where you have an index of your information, your historical queries, your behavior online, and it hits up to like basically an API of the AI, and then it comes back with a result that is all uniquely on your phone alone. right? And we would have to have some kind of mechanism to validate that, right? That model, that it's not going up and being mass aggregated to the cloud, which is what's happening now. That's how Google's developed all of their cohorts that they're using for paid, is from organic, right? Like, they're like, we know a lot about you. We're going to put you in a group, and then we're going to sell that group understanding over here as a cohort data. Like,
I mean, two thoughts on that. One, this is probably not a good time to kind of say this, but some people get divorced. And so suddenly, you know, their browsing history and everything. Sorry, Dan's getting married, which is why I'm joking at him. But my point is, when couples split up, often, you know, their dietary, like, you know, I used to work for a takeaway company, and we could almost see when couples split up, because suddenly they're no longer a vegan. They're no longer, you know, we can sort of, the targets and the marketing, everything would have to change, and quite rapidly, because otherwise we're targeting an entity that has quite fundamentally changed. The other part of it, of course, is the privacy implications. And, you know, I'm a very boring old man living in a country which has very liberal kind of attitudes, doesn't care about my religion, doesn't care about my everything. And as a result of that, you know, I'm quite happy to share all of my browsing history with anybody and everybody, almost. And, you know, nobody will actually look at it and kind of go, wow, you're very interesting. But a lot of people live in countries and situations where the privacy implications are actually, there's legal implications, there's health implications, there's actually risk associated with it all. And that changes things quite considerably. Sorry, taking it off on a dark one.
No, you're quite right, because it's like, whilst GDPR had all the hoo-ha and everything in the UK, the actual enforcement of it in the UK is relatively, in my opinion, the bark was much worse than what the bite has been. When they were saying, oh, you need to register for this, you need to be prepared for fines, you need to prepare for this, I've not noticed any discernible change in practice from the worst, probably I'm going to say the worst offending segments of those markets who were abusing data in the first place. They don't seem to have changed the practice at all. I mean, most of the SEO community, I think, in the past couple of days has received a random AI tool mass email, and everyone's on the CC, and we won't name the AI. I think you got it as well, didn't you, Garrett? Yeah. And it's like, the amount of different regions that's affected, the amount of different privacy laws that's potentially broken, it still goes on now, and nothing's going to happen. There's going to be no consequence to it.
Yeah, to that point, like, I completely agree with Cindy of all the necessary mechanisms that need to be put in place. And I also think we need to remember, you know, if you're an optimist like I am, that if this is a point in time with technology isn't where it needs to be, like, we're still at the nascent, you know, part of AI, and I think it'll get significantly better. That said, and not to get too political, because I do have faith in government, but I don't have faith in government to effectively regulate technology in the best interests of the people. And so, you know, someone like Cindy or, you know, all these experts in the field know what we need to do, but the people in charge we're at a point that aren't capable of understanding. Okay.
Garrett, was that just a plug for my new company? Did you know I started a company to educate governments about technology? Yeah, I did.
No, but you can send me the check afterwards. You know, when you get your big contract.
This video might go awesome over there as well. We'll see.
Are you going to explain to them how TikTok works? That was the best interview ever, when they kind of asked him, you know, so how does TikTok access your Wi-Fi? And, you know, basically all those questions. Well, sorry,
yes,
derailing again.
Yes. We're going to try and prevent people in the government from asking stupid questions on TV.
You're the best person to do that, though, because, like, I really don't. They do need your, you know, kind of ability to explain all the, you know, so much of you don't know what you don't know, and you need to tell them you don't know what you don't know. Here's what you do need to know, but you probably are not going to know what you need to know. What you need to know. Is that?
I mean, they don't even know the basics, so.
Not a lot of it makes it across to the UK in terms of what goes on in those court cases, but I just remember the prevalent ones of when Zuckerberg was even being questioned all the time, and it was the standard. So if I walk over there from here, will Facebook know? And he's just looking blank, like, no, help me. Like, it's like, is this a trick question?
By the way, how is he the tech hero all of a sudden, like looking like the good guy in all of these villains these days? That's a whole other conversation.
My thought on
Yes,
that
fair,
is,
isn't it?
yeah, my thought on that with Zuckerberg is because in the UK they've got Nick Clegg as part of Meta, who used to be the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, and for a brief moment in history, he was seen as a good guy in British politics, and he really painted a good picture. And then he burnt the party when he did a coalition with the Conservatives. I kind of feel they brought him in because it's like, you know how to make people look nice. Like, how do you make this villain look like the good guy? And I think we're just trying to do some sort of mega mind kind of spinning stuff at the moment. Yeah. Just before we wrap up, does anyone have any other final thoughts they want to go over on what we've discussed today?
That's so dangerous. Too many.
I was going to say, I've got like so many. I could talk for another hour or two.
I've got none.
So I guess we'll wrap up then for this. We'll probably do a bonus episode with everything Cindy doesn't want in 30 seconds to a minute at the end. But I want to thank everyone for joining us again today. So thank you to Garrett, Gerry, and Cindy, and thank you to you all for listening at home. Let's be honest, you're listening to an SEO related podcast. You're probably doing this while screaming into a spreadsheet of some sorts. But thank you very much for everyone for taking part. And if anyone has any opinions on what's been discussed today, please do drop them in the comments below. Or do you know what? If you want to come on one of these episodes in the future, we're not just limited to 4 people. I'll happily have 6 or 7 people on here shouting at each other all at once with different opinions. If you want to come on, just drop me an email and we'll get it sorted. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.